If you know anything about me, you know I love storytelling. I'm a certified speaking coach. I'll start with that. And I'm also a longtime Toastmaster. So, Toastmaster professional speaker. I love storytelling. And the goal for today is for you to pick up the skills that you need to tell better stories. This is going to be recorded. It's going to be posted on my YouTube channel as well. So, it'll be there for you to watch and review as well. So, just know that stories are absolutely everything. And I want to tell you something that illustrates that perfectly. Two friends from New York City, Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn, they decided to conduct an experiment. What they do is they go out and they buy 100 items on eBay. Sorry, they buy 100 items to sell on eBay. 100 random items, and for these items they paid a grand total of 129 bucks. So it's cheap items. They picked up just knickknacks items and they put them on eBay and sold them. $129 is what they paid for it. What they made was $3,612.51. $129 to over 3,000 for the same 100 items. How do you think they were able to do that? And you can come off mute, you can throw it in the chat if you think you know. How do you think they were able to turn $129 to over 3,000?
They told a story about each item.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you very much. They told a story about each item. So what they did was the experiment, and thank you for muting yourself again, Sandy, appreciate it. What they did was they put a fictional story, they just made it up, but they put a heartfelt story next to each item, sold it on eBay, and it immediately increased the value. That's the power of a story. It increases the value. It's not just about money. It's about the feeling your listeners have. It's about connecting with your audience. And if you've ever heard of Les Brown, he's rated as one of the top 5 speakers in the world. One of my favorite speakers is actually my favorite speaker of all time. If you've never heard him speak, you can go on YouTube and find him. But he echoes what a lot of other speakers say. And he always says, you never make a point without telling a story, and you never tell a story without making a point. So first off, never make a point without telling a story. It does not matter what type of presentation you're giving. It can be a technical presentation. It can be a boardroom presentation. It can be a conversation with loved ones. If you tell a story, you're going to connect even better to your audience. For those who are Toastmasters in the room, professional speaker and world champion public speaker Ed Tate once said that facts are 33 times more memorable when you wrap them in a story. They are more memorable when you wrap them in the story. So whenever you can bring a story to illustrate your point, you're going to connect with your audience. Let's talk about the second part. Never tell a story without making a point. That's what we're going to talk about today, because a lot of times, and you may have heard it, you may have heard someone give a story and they may be very animated, they may be very energetic, but you leave the story and you're like, okay, well, what was the point of that? Has that ever happened to you? Anyone? You know, you've heard a story and you're like, okay, that was great, but what am I supposed to do with that? Well, the reason that happens is because they're missing one or more of the 5 steps you're going to pick up today. 5 steps. You pass every idea you have through this filter, and you will have a world-class story, I promise you. So what I want you to think about as we're going through is, what's your story? And I have a couple of people that have volunteered that are going to do some coaching after, but I'm always willing to, to help you with your story and help you flesh it out. So we're going to spend some time at the end doing that. But I want you to think about an idea. Maybe it's a story that you want to insert into a keynote presentation. Maybe it's a story that you just want to expand and take to a TED stage. Maybe it's a story just for a contest. Maybe you're going to compete next year in the World Championship of Public Speaking, whatever that is for you. I use stories all throughout my keynote presentations, and I apply these steps to the stories that I use. So think about your own story as we go through this process. So the best way I thought to start is to play a demonstration story. So a demonstration story that will illustrate the 5 points. Then we're going to go through the 5 points and look back at that speech and point out exactly when the 5 points were made. Does that sound good, everyone? Sound good? Thumbs up? See some thumbs up here? Okay. So, who did I go to get that story from? Well, I went to a friend of mine. I wanted to make sure that I had permission to use the story, so I went to a personal friend. But this personal friend is the District 86 International Speech Contest champion. This personal friend has won 5 district speech competitions. He knows what he's doing. This personal friend came third in the World Championship of Public Speaking. And even if you're not a Toastmaster, he's a professional speaker as well. And I think you'll see after this story that it's not just he's a good Toastmaster speaker. He's an amazing speaker. He's my friend Roger Caesar. You may know him. And he gave me permission to use his semifinal speech to analyze for the purposes of this workshop. So what I'm going to do is now get Amparo to hand it back to me as host. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm going to play his speech. All right. And all I need is just a thumbs up, silent thumbs up if you can hear the speech. I want to make sure it's okay. And I'm going to do that right now. Share sound, optimize for video clip, share.
Roger Caesar. Didn't see it coming. Didn't see it coming. Roger Caesar.
As the rain cascaded onto the windshield of the car, I quickly tried to gain control of it by placing one hand on the steering wheel, the other frantically wiping the fog that had formulated on the glass. Suddenly, I could feel the vehicle veering to the left, then right, then sputtering, stalling, and stopping on the side of the road. Many thoughts ran through my mind. What happened? How did I get here? Could I have done things differently? And then it hit me. Roger, you are one stubborn fool. Contest chair, and anyone who's ever wished they could turn back the hands of time. Life has a funny way of teaching you the most predictable lessons at the most unpredictable times. Who knew that 6 words would change me forever and could change your life too? It all started when I was 18 years old, ready to begin college, when my dad came to me enthusiastically and said, "Raj, boy, I'm real proud of you, you know. You matured." Did I all of a sudden become his favorite? Because I started laughing, wondering, who is he talking to? But I let him finish. "You worked 2 jobs, showed great responsibility. Today you get your own car." Now I'm thinking, did Christmas come early and I didn't get the memo? Or is this Dad's brilliant plan to get rid of me quickly? You decide. But on that day, true to his word, we searched for that perfect car for me. And there it was, as if the heavens had opened up around it. A red sports car, drop top, mag wheels, 2-seater. Girls. Now Dad looked at the car, looked at me, looked at the car. "We'll take this one." A Ford Taurus. Snapped the dream right out of me. I see he picked the perfect car for him. Have you ever had your dreams crushed right before your eyes? Yet Dad's words were simple. "Son, it's your first car. Take care of it and be grateful. Plus, you could take the family around if we need you to." I was Uber before Uber became Uber. Now, I know what you're thinking. What a spoiled brat, right? I mean, at least I got a car. And in hindsight, maybe I was. But it wasn't my perfect car. In fact, I hated it, didn't appreciate it, and from that moment on, did the bare minimum to take care of it. Car fluids? Ah. A car wash? Oh, man, I'll let the rain take care of that. And gas? $5, please. I just simply didn't care. Have you ever been there? It took one night out with friends for me to truly understand what Dad meant. And while driving, I could distinctly smell something coming from the hood of the car, but I ignored it. And on the way home, I could smell something again, but I ignored it. It wasn't until smoke started billowing out of the hood of the car that I realized, well, maybe I should have put those fluids in after all. And that's when the car started to sputter, stall, and stop, leaving us stranded and scared on the side of the road. Why didn't I do things differently? Why did I wait? Now, frustrated, I knew my only choice was to call. Dad, have you ever called your parents at 4 o'clock in the morning? Was it anything positive? When Dad arrived, his expression cold as ice. If his eyes could talk, they would speak volumes. But he said, and at home, he asked, when did you know? Since 9 o'clock. The disappointment in his eyes crushed my spirit. And as he laid his hands on my slumped shoulders, what he said next, I will never forget. Son, the next time you're feeling ungrateful for what you have, learn to appreciate your blessings and don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until it's too late. Those 6 powerful words have remained with me to this day because over time I've learned that it's more than just a car. You see, Dad's lesson was that in life, it's about the value and appreciation we place on what we have and the relationships we forge. So let me ask you this. Come here. Is there anyone or anything in your life that you may be ignoring, taking for granted, and the situation is billowing out smoke? Is it sputtering, stalling, or possibly stopping on the side of your life's road? Because on that night, I didn't see it coming. But the moment I decided to take Dad's advice, my appreciation for everything changed. And when I didn't wait until it was too late, relationships improved. Everything from family to friends, heck, even my car. Because it's not about what you drive, it's what drives you. And now I'm driven by my blessings. Are you? If our world today has taught us anything, it's to not lose sight of our blessings and to understand that nothing in this world is perfect. But you have the power to ignite your engines and fuel what is perfect for you. The things you have, the people you love, and those precious moments you share. After all, it's clear now that all it takes is 6 words. Don't wait until it's too late. Contest chair.
All right. I'll let you soak in the speech. And it's funny because Roger just joined us. So it's kind of funny that he joined us just after his speech, which is awesome. Obviously, there's a lot to take away from that speech. Obviously, there's a lot of good to take away from that speech. I think what happens sometimes, however, is when you see a good speech, and raise your hand if you thought it was a good speech, if you thought it was a really good speech. Um, a lot of times people leave and think, okay, that's just a dynamic speaker. He's really good. And he has those qualities. He's a very good speaker. But there's a process. There's steps that you can use in your stories to have the impact with the audience, the same type of impact with your audience, the people that you're meant to connect with, right? There's people that he's meant to connect with. There's people that you're meant to connect with. So let's go through the 5 steps. Let's look back at the speech and analyze, okay, what are the 5 steps that make that story so powerful and that can make your stories just as powerful? So for step 1, I want to ask a question. Raise your hand if you like movies. Raise your hand if you like movies. All right. Why do we like movies? Why do we like movies? And anyone can come off of mute and just answer. What is it that we like about the movie experience, about going in to see a movie when, we can do that again? I think most of us can now do that again. What are some of the things we like about movies? Jennifer?
Well, it tells us a story. Typically, there's something we relate to in it, whether it's us personally or people in there that we recognize as someone already in our life. And they always wrap it up in a little bow at the end. There's always a conclusion or a culmination. And I've only ever been to one movie where it did not do that. And nobody in the theater moved. Like everyone sat there and we were like, is it over? Like we really didn't know it was over because it had no resolve.
So they were waiting for an ending, right?
We were waiting for an ending, and we literally thought maybe the film broke, and people did not move. So that shows you wait, like whether it sometimes it's a sad ending too, but it has a resolution.
Okay. And exactly. And we like to follow the journey of a movie. And one thing that is advantageous about movies is that you can see what's happening. You see what's happening, you hear the sound effects, you see a lot going on the screen. As speakers, we need to create that for our audience, especially as storytellers. So let's go to step number 1. And step number 1 is the scene. If you can't read it behind me, I will say it out loud anyways. Step 1 is the scene. You want to give your audience a physical picture. You want to make sure they can see something. So here's the phrase to remember here. Don't tell your story, show your story. Don't tell your story, show your story. So as we're looking back at Roger's speech, 4 S's to remember. You want to see, you want sounds, you want sensations, and you want smells. You don't have to have all 4 in every speech. But when you can include as many as possible, you give your audience a feeling like they're not just sitting there looking at you telling a story, they're in your story because the storyteller has shown it through their kinesthetic and sensory descriptions. So, what could we see? How did Roger help us see his picture in his story? And Roger, thank you for coming, by the way. And if I miss anything, you are more than welcome to jump in and say anything you want here. So thank you for allowing me to do your speech.
Thank you for telling me. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody.
So what could we see? What kind of things did he do to allow us to see what was going on in his story? And this is a discussion. Victoria, you've come off mute. Marjane, you came off mute. I don't know if you meant to, but Victoria first, Marjane second.
Sure. Right away, I could picture the fog on the window because his gestures were trying to clear it off, and the driving gestures too. I was right there in that front seat trying to drive through a very rainy night.
Absolutely. Marjane.
Yeah, that was my first thought, was the rain. And then I could also see that red car.
So you could see the car, exactly, use the screen as a mirror. There's a lot of things he did. And yes, there are other things he did as well. I don't know if anyone has anything else. Denise, and I want to allow you to pick out what was in the speech, because as you see it, as you recognize it in his speech, you'll be able to put these things in your own. So Denise, go ahead.
Mental imagery.
Yeah.
He painted the picture, the scene with the words, his gestures. Roger, I love your facial expressions and your vocal imitation of your father's Jamaican or
No, Grenadian. Grenadian.
Grenadian. Okay, West Indian.
Yes. Yes.
At which I picked up right away, and I loved the way the voice changed when you were doing the different character and the facial expressions and getting up close in the camera. You used your staging area well, and I liked how you interacted with the screen, as if your audience was right in front of your face. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Denise, are you a Toastmaster?
Yes, and guess
Yes.
what? You're going to be having an invitation to come to one of my workshops and
100%. I'm
do
there.
a presentation. It doesn't have to be this one, just a presentation. Starting in March.
No problem, no problem. Yeah, so you could see a lot, and I'll come back to one of the points Denise made about his father speaking. And I want to move on to sounds. What could you hear? What kind of sounds did he describe? Did anyone pick up on the sounds? Nancy.
Yeah, I think it was in his voice, the emotive words that he used, as well as expressing those words with anger, sadness. His father was disappointed. And you could feel all those things through the way he said those words.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Roger, as a coach as well, will tell you he doesn't memorize his speeches, but he has words that I'm sure he'll agree with me. He makes sure he says in the speech. So the cascading rain, the screeching of the tires. There's certain words that are not just rain was falling, but the rain is cascading. The screeching of the tires. Anyone can, when you make, I forgot what it's called, but when you can use a word that describes a sound, it connects with your audience better. And then it's been a long time since I've been in English class, but screech.
Automatopoeia.
Oh, is it onomatopoeia? Okay, thank you very much. See, I'm here to learn too. So onomatopoeia. So those are the sounds. Sensations. What kind of things could you feel? And this is sometimes a little bit harder to decipher, but what did he do to make sure that we knew we could feel him in the car as well? And if you don't know, I'll just share. Tom, did you want to jump in?
Sure, I felt the damn humidity from the windows. I'm in Colorado. I don't have humidity, so I felt it the way he felt it and described it.
Yeah, absolutely. The way he felt it, described it, he said feel. And that's something you can do. You can just use a word that describes how you feel. I felt the vehicle veering. And finally, smell. He said, I smelled something. I smelled something. And he kept not doing something about it. So he actually had all four in there. Now, like I said, you don't always have to have all four, but if you can have a combination of them in there, and studies have shown that our most powerful sense when it comes to storytelling is smell. So if you can include something that makes people think of something they smell, that's the most powerful of the four. I'm not saying you should disclude any of the others, but that's the most powerful according to studies when it comes to storytelling. And Tom, you can correct me if there's anything I'm missing out here too, because Tom teaches storytelling. So that's number one, give your audience a physical picture. Step number two is the struggle. Any comic book movie fans in here? Does anyone watch DC or Marvel movies at all? Okay, good. David, are you a DC or Marvel person?
Marvel.
Marvel. And just before I move on, anybody DC over Marvel, or people more Team Marvel or Team DC? So DC, who are the DC people? Roger's a DC person. Okay. So you're not going to necessarily like what I have to say, but I'm a Marvel person. And yes, I know there are people that love DC, but they've taken surveys, and apparently from the surveys, Marvel wins. Team Marvel wins. But yeah, exactly. That's it. Roger's going to check out now. But here's why. You think of the DC bad guys, right? So you think of Justice League, you think of Steppenwolf and maybe Cheetah from the Wonder Woman movie, but you don't necessarily kind of gravitate to them the way you gravitate to the Thanos and the Ultron and the enemies make the hero more noticeable. So step 2 is the struggle. So remember this: no struggle, no story. If we don't have a struggle, if we don't have something to struggle against and we can't see it and really get our hands on it, we have no story. So no struggle, no story. You want to describe your conflict or your challenge. So going back to the story, what was the conflict? What was the struggle that was going on in the story that we just watched from Roger? Jennifer.
Well, it started out different people, him in his car, yeah. But it also the struggle of being honest with his dad, I think, too. There was that other, because he waited so long, too, right? You could see that. So there was a couple. Yeah. There was a struggle about, the car. He didn't like the car. He didn't want to like the car. Yeah. But then later it becomes the honesty with his dad and admitting the situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Owning up.
Yeah, and you absolutely covered it. Denise, do you have a point to add?
I think for me, the struggle was with his lack of appreciation for something that was given to him. By the way, Roger, I had to pay for my first car. It was not given to me, and my father was a used car salesman. So, two people like your father.
Well, afterwards, I paid the price for the next car.
Yes, and you should have the first time, because then you would have appreciated what your father gave you. So handing a person something does not teach them appreciation. Making them work for it and pay for it does.
Absolutely. The lessons we learn from our parents, we pass on to our kids, and he does come around to appreciation. When you think of your conflict, your challenge, they have external and internal, right? So if you have both in there, that's good. Internal tends to be the most important elements, the most important type of challenge to go through. So, Roger, you didn't know you were going to get a lesson tonight. That's funny. Yeah, so his external was, of course, the car crash, the going through and not listening to his dad and then crashing the car. But the internal was himself. So think that man versus self, if you've ever heard that conflict term mentioned, his arrogance, for lack of a better word. I don't like this car. I'm just not going to take care of it, right? So that was the struggle inside. And here's a bonus tip when it comes to your conflict. When it comes to your struggle, the faster you can get to that struggle in your story, the better. See, you hear speakers sometimes, and if they're giving, say they are giving a keynote speech and there's a 10-minute story in there, they'll have 3-4 minutes before they get to the conflict. Well, the good thing about the story we just heard is it started with the conflict. Then there was backstory, then he went back to the conflict. So as soon as you get people in the conflict, they are into your story. They're hooked right away. So remember that. No struggle, no story. Get to it as quickly as you can. Okay? So number 3. Let's go to step number 3. And number 3 is the superhero. You want to reveal what or who helped you overcome your struggle. Any Star Wars fans in here? Raise your hand. Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. Why do we relate to Luke Skywalker, Nancy? So no, let's go Kathy Jorgensen. I haven't heard from you yet. Kathy, why do we relate to Luke so much?
Oh, because it's the basic, there he is out on that planet all by himself, yet he has this urge, this inside feeling that there is more to life, that it's an inner struggle. There you go. There's your struggle. It's this inner struggle that he had, that there's more for him to do, and that just farming on this planet, this dead planet, is just not for him.
Absolutely. And who was his superhero?
Oh, that would have been Harrison Ford. Yoda. Oh gosh. Oh my God. No. Yeah, Yoda. Oh gosh, how easily. Okay, sorry.
It's okay. Yoda, by the way, was not played by Harrison Ford, but that's okay.
No. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
No problem. So the phrase to remember here is Heroes keep you humble. You see, we relate to Luke not only because of the struggle he went through, but because he had to get help to overcome it, right? So Luke had Yoda. If you've ever watched The Matrix, Neo had Morpheus. If you've ever watched the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter had Dumbledore, I think. So we have the heroes in our lives that help us overcome. And what that does, that not only keeps us humble, but it humanizes us to our audience. So it lets the audience know, hey, listen, this person standing on the stage struggled. They had to get help to overcome what they went through. Obviously, who was the hero in the story that we heard? Let's take someone that hasn't spoken yet. The hero of the story that we heard. Jackie, did you listen to the story?
Yes, I listened to the story, and I'd probably say Roger's father was the hero.
Absolutely. Absolutely. His father was the hero, and I think, Roger, you'd agree with that. Your father was the hero that gave you the lesson.
Maybe now I will.
Yeah, exactly. Begrudgingly, over time, he agreed that his father was his hero. And to Denise's point earlier, she remembered the accent. The best way to connect with the heroes in the story, the characters in the story, is to let us hear them. Roger could have just said, my dad told me, and then just narrated it. But he used the line of dialogue which brought us into the scene, which made the scene present and allowed us to relive his story with him. So hearing his dad, now we get to know his dad a little bit. We get to know what he sounds like. We get to know the sternness in his voice. And we get to kind of fear him a little bit too when he goes home at 4 a.m. So remember that dialogue in your stories is what is going to be the thing that brings people in. And so what helped you overcome your struggle? And I say it can come from people or pages. So you don't necessarily have to have learned your lesson from someone else. So I have a story that I talk about where I learned my lesson from a book by Eckhart Tolle. So I read his book like the author was reading it to me. And so it was like the book was talking to me. So your heroes can come from a lot of different places. One of my coaches, his hero was a statue, a historical statue that was sitting on his nightstand. And that he gave a voice, and that became his hero. All it has to do is teach you the lesson, animate it, it can do well for you. Les Brown has a story where Murphy's Law became a character in his story and taught him a lesson. So just, you can be creative with it. Just remember that something that helps you overcome, it will connect you with your audience. So that's number 3, the superhero. So let's go on to step number 4. Step number 4 is one that a lot of speakers miss. And they miss it because they go through the end of their story. They think they get to the conflict, they overcome it by introducing us to our superhero, and then they kind of just trail off. But step number 4 is extremely important. It's called the shift. You want to talk about the emotional change you experienced on your journey. Remember this: if you didn't change, your audience won't either. If you didn't change, your audience won't either. You see, we like the story of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. We like the story of Neo in The Matrix because we can see the change, the emotional change from unsure to confident. We can see that throughout the story, and we can see that at the end. And a lot of times I've told stories and I've missed this step as well. But this shift, this change is what's going to really separate you from other speakers. So does anyone know the emotional change that Roger went through on this speech, on this journey? Victoria, thank you.
Well, it was when he admitted that he was in error for neglecting things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'd say.
And if you were to put names to the emotions he went through from blank to blank. So think of that. When you're writing a story, you went from blank to blank. So if Neo in the Matrix went from unsure to confident. What did Roger go through in his story? He went from blank to blank. What do you think?
He went from someone who ignored life's blessings to someone who realized, you know what, I better pay attention to them. My dad was right. I better think about what I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You could say from arrogant, would that be the word?
Arrogant, yes.
Right? Arrogant. I can say that because you went on a journey and you showed us the journey. I know. Because you went from appreciative, you went to appreciative, right? And not only that, he didn't just say, oh, well, I was unappreciative, I was arrogant, and now I'm appreciative. He said, listen, my relationships improved. He told us how his life is better. When you speak, when you talk about overcoming, once you've introduced us to the superhero, tell us how your life's better, right? How's your life better now? Because that's how you sell it to your audience, right? So his relationships have improved. He's driven by his blessings. So now we know, okay, the lesson that he's teaching us has changed him. It might change me too. Right? So what's the shift? And it's just, like I said, it can be one line that you do when you're preparing your story. From blank to blank. What were you at the beginning of the story and what are you at the end? And you need to show us in the beginning. There's a book that I'm going to recommend, and I'll talk about it later again, but it's called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. And he says, try to show that beginning part of the shift early on in your speech so that when you take us on the journey and then you come to it at the end, you've shown us that shift. Step number 4 is the shift. Let's go to the final step. So our final step is the statement. The statement is what is most memorable. Now, before we get to the statement and the speech we heard, remember this: the phrase is what stays. The phrase is what stays. JFK, John F. Kennedy, does anyone know any of his speeches? Okay, no, let's just forget that question. Does anyone remember anything John F. Kennedy has ever said? Anyone?
Yes.
Okay. Who was this person that said yes?
Oh, I did, Kathy.
Okay, Kathy, tell me something John F. Kennedy has said.
Well, the thing that stays in my head, and I hope I'm right, is some of the people will like you, some of the people will like you some of the time, but not all the people will like you all of the time.
Okay, does anyone remember that phrase?
No, I actually remember, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And ich bin a Berliner, meaning I am a Berliner, when the Soviet Union threw up the wall in Berlin, which came up and down in my lifetime.
Okay, so ask not what you can do for your country. Raise your hand if that is the most memorable line you know from John F. Kennedy. Okay. There is a reason for that. There's a reason for that. That line was written for him by a speechwriter. And the book I'm about to recommend is the person who wrote all the presidential speeches for these presidents. So it was designed on purpose to be memorable. And I'll talk about why it was memorable in a minute, but what was the statement? What was the phrase that stays in Roger's speech? Nancy.
I feel like he had 2. Never saw it coming and don't wait until it's too late. Those 6 words.
Anyone else?
I would agree that I found the 6 words memorable. Don't wait till it's too late. But also I like the one about drive, which I can't quite remember, but drive.
Yeah, he said
it's not about what you drive. It's what drives you.
It's not what you drive, it's what drives you. I wrote that down, actually.
Perfect. So his phrase, and Roger can correct me if I'm wrong, the main phrase was don't wait until it's too late.
That's right.
He announced in the beginning 6 words, would change my life, can change yours as well. Later on, he said 6 words. He used the 3 on both hands, and then he said it at the very end. So when you think about the main phrase, yes, there was a lot of quotable quotes in the speech, which is great. You layer it on so people remember a lot of things from your speech. Amazing job. But the main phrase, it tends to be either repeated or hinted to, the thing that you take away, the call to action. So, right, don't wait until it's too late. Something he's telling us to do. Ask not what your country can do for you. It's something he's telling you to do. So here's, and I don't know, Roger, how you prepared that or what made you think of that. I mean, it's just what your father said, but it happens to fall into another formula that I'm going to go into now that actually helps you remember phrases. Both your phrases did too, actually, the drive one as well. So when we look at ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. The book to read is Speak Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln, James C. Humes. Yeah. And what he does is he has chapters that make, I think there's like 21 chapters in there, and it's how to make your speech memorable, how to make your speeches powerful. One of the chapters is called the power line. And in it, he says to make your lines powerful, like their main lines powerful, or in this case, the statement or phrase, you want to use what he calls the cream rule. So cream is contrast, R is rhyme, E is echo, A is alliteration, M is metaphor. Let me briefly explain that. Contrast, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's opposites. Right? So rhyme, don't wait until it's too late, right? So rhyme, Roger had that in there. Echo is when you repeat words. It's not what you drive, it's what drives you. Ask not what you can do for ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. There's multiple words that are echoed, repeated in JFK's phrase, and also Roger's as well. That's why we remember it. Alliteration. It's not about the color of your skin, but the content of your character. Does anyone remember that line? Does anyone remember who said it? C. Alliteration is when multiple words in the same sentence begin with the same letter. That helps you. Drive, country, ask. So when we can do that, our lines become more memorable. And that's why, Jennifer, you not only remember don't wait until it's too late, had the rhyme, you remembered it's not what you drive, it's what drives you. It had the echo, it had the contrast, right? So, and then metaphor, what drives you is a metaphor because he metaphor car, drive, spirit, person. Make sense? So he had a metaphor in there as well too, right? And asking what you can do for your country. So think of these 5 rules. I'd say pick up the book, read it. It's a great read and it's going to help you. But specifically for this last step, the statement, that's a rule that will help you make phrases or develop phrases that are going to be remembered. Any questions on that last step there? Because I know I went through cream very quickly.
You will put the name of the book in the chat, if you would.
Yeah. I'll do that right after I'm done here. It's called
Okay, great. Thanks.
Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln.
Could you go over metaphor again?
So metaphor is just when something is like something else, right? So I'm actually going to recommend another book that you read. It's called The Tall Lady with the Iceberg. Just type in that into Amazon and it will tell you. Roger, you have something to say here?
Finish what you're saying. I was just going to
explain. Yeah, no, I think her name was Anne something, and I forgot what her name was. But she has a book on how to create metaphors that is absolutely phenomenal. So crabs in the bucket, when people pull you down. Anything that's like something else is a metaphor. So you relate the known to the unknown, and that's what a metaphor does. Roger, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, and thank you for asking the question, Denise. When I create any of my speeches, the majority of my speeches, I try to find a metaphor that is woven into the actual speech. In this case, it was a car. The car was the metaphor, and everything that I did within that speech had something to do with the car in some way, shape, or form. Driving, different things that have to do with the car, I put it in there. I have done a speech where I talk about singing, and I go through a whole different list of things when it came to singing. I like doing that because it sticks to people in the minds of my audience whenever I do those types of speeches. So dealing with metaphors is something I love doing.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's what makes things more memorable, having metaphors not only in your line, but in your speech as well. So yes, thank you for that, Roger. Have them in your speech, not just in your line. So there we have it. Our 5 S's, our 5 steps. The scene, give your audience a physical picture. Struggle, no story. Superhero, who or what helped you get over that. The shift, that emotional change from what to what. And the statement, remember the phrase, is what stays. Now, as you think about your own stories, one of the questions I do get often, and I do want to cover this off before we finish off here, I know I want to be respectful of your time, is how to find stories. And a lot of people will tell you different ways to find stories, and there are a lot of methods to finding your own stories. So I'll just share a couple that will help you. If you're having trouble finding a story to insert in your keynote or to just a story to tell, here are 2 techniques that I found were pretty good, and they are techniques that you can actually use over and over again. Storyworthy, Matthew Dix, that's the other book I wanted to recommend. And Kathy Amparo was nice enough to type in the name of the metaphor book, and I think she shared it with everybody. And then I typed in the James C. Hume's book. I will type in one more book called Storyworthy. Okay. Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. He has a method for finding stories that I found pretty ingenious, and it's called first, last, best, worst. So on a piece of paper, you write down first, last, best, worst, and then you just put a noun beside it. So car, story about your first car, story about the last car you had, story about the best car you had, story about the worst car you had. Friend, first friend, most recent friend, best, worst. I'm sure there's stories there. House, you can come up with any noun you want and start to go through that, and you'll start to find stories. So for those of you who are in Toastmasters and you have to tell stories over and over again, maybe you're doing pathways and you need another story, try this method. It will help you come up with other ideas. And any noun will work in there. And I found it's actually a pretty good way to find stories. The method that I teach most often is the 5 F's. And the 5 F's are your first, flaws, failures, frustrations, and I've added floss to this list. So first time you did something. First time. Think of all the firsts in your life and the lessons that you learned along the way. Your flaws, right? In the story tonight, we heard about a flaw, a personal flaw. We heard about a failure, right? So failures. When did you fail at something, and what did it teach you? What are the lessons that you learned out of that? Frustrations, things that frustrate you. That can be a little bit lighter. Things that frustrate me are slow drivers on the highway in the wrong lane, right? So you can come up with a lot of different things that frustrate you. And I've added floss recently because you ever had that time where you've eaten something and there's something in your teeth and you just can't get it out, right? Maybe you had popcorn, or maybe you had something. The other night I was eating popcorn and I was trying to get my tongue in there to get that piece of food out. And then, does that ever happen to you? You get that piece stuck in and you absolutely have to get up and from whatever you're doing and floss your teeth and get that piece of food out. Well, there's some things in your life that are just stuck in there. And there's places you don't want to go, things that just annoy you, things that are just inside here that you don't want to bring out. And they're just going to annoy you until you start talking about them. There's places that you may not want to go. There's things that you may say, okay, no one wants to hear about that, or I'm not sure I want to talk about that. It's going to be like the popcorn in your teeth until you create a story about it. If you are a storyteller, until you create a story about it and get that out, it's going to be like that piece of popcorn in your teeth. So I call those floss stories. So just think about those. If you're ever lacking for stories, those are ways to kind of flesh out some stories that you can put in your keynotes or whatever you need a story for. So I will end with this. I walked into my first Toastmasters meeting. Like how I got to being, a speaker and a coach is I walked into a Toastmaster meeting in 2013. Amparo can attest to this because I went to a couple of different clubs and I didn't feel comfortable. I just wanted to work on my confidence. I wanted to become just a more confident person. And she shook my hand. She invited me to her club. And that's how I started to learn about speaking. I started to hire coaches. And fast forward to now, I've learned from a lot of different coaches. And I'm just grateful to be here, grateful to be able to help other people become great speakers and work on becoming a better speaker myself. And I've learned from a lot of different people, and I'm grateful to be able to share what I've, share what I know about storytelling, not only on stages, but in formats like this. So I just want to thank you for listening to me ramble for the last hour. Thank you very much.